Okay, so admittedly, normally this takes longer than an hour, but we'll try to scoot through some of the basics. And then again, you all wonderfully either have had or will have this content in your 840 class. So this can be kind of a prep or a primer, right? What I often find the spring term is by the time that I cover it in 840, students have already gone through a few. Don't stress out if you're not doing that yet. But it's just helpful to have under your belt as soon as possible. Now, a few other provisos. So we have this culture and social. Yeah, I can't see Andrea. I want to scoot over so I can see your beautiful face. Yes, watch you eat. Yes. So we have a pretty intense culture in human services, social work. That we're in a calling. That it's not about the money, right? That we don't have any, money to give. We're resource constrained. It's about self-sacrifice, and So the more conservative angle that I would take on that is that negotiation and resource constraint are not mutually exclusive, because almost always in the case of a compensation negotiation, which is what today is about, but then other negotiations, like this tool can apply to organization negotiations about partnerships, for example. Like there are other ways that we negotiate, right? And this set of tools can apply in those cases. But in the compensation negotiation, as well as others, there is a bargaining zone, meaning that there is an overlapping area in terms of what one party is willing to pay and the other party is willing to accept, even when it's a resource-constrained environment, right? Because they wouldn't be hiring if they didn't have a certain amount of funding, right? A certain amount of money to provide. And what tends to happen is because of that calling culture, because of fairly persistent, pernicious gender roles that also make it extra challenging for women in particular to contemplate negotiating, we just don't negotiate. Either it doesn't even come up and we get a call about a job offer, and hey, you want it? And so often with students, I even have to explain, most times between the offer and starting the job, you negotiate what you're going to get, right? You don't just hop from the offer into the job. So admittedly, it happens so little that students may not even have experienced it or know that that's part of the process. Or if they are invited to negotiate, but often it's on the spot with the offer versus having a prep period and then doing it, it isn't a negotiation. It's a presentation of the one party's offer, and then it's accepted. And what we know, which I previewed the whole series with this comment a few weeks ago, is that in general, when that happens, like the incidence of women especially not negotiating at all or negotiating poorly, is the single greatest remaining explanation for the gender wage gap, right? We also know from data that human services, HR, employee instability, right, voluntary turnover, dissatisfaction are huge issues in human services. I mean, we have a revolving door in many cases. And I would argue, though, often in human services, we focus on, are the workers committed? Did we hire the right people? We have a workplace structural problem, and it starts in many ways with compensation. And it's not just the pay. Pay is big, but it's also the benefits that we provide. Traditional benefits and other kinds of work-life balancing benefits, right? Some of which don't cost that much money. They're logistically complicated, perhaps, but they don't have to cost a lot of money. And so if we're not, as an organization, oriented toward providing those, we're generating discontented and short-term revolving door workplaces, which do no favors to our clients, right? So that's the motivation point, right? Because there is almost always a bargaining zone to negotiate, we need to negotiate, right? So I'm training folks who are going to have to negotiate as a form of self-advocacy. And then my bigger picture goal is that you all will be in the position of negotiating as employers in the future. You will. You may not believe it. You will. And I want you then to be supportive of that process on both sides, as well as good at it for your organizations. So there's the deal. How am I doing? Good? Okay. And again, you'll hear that pitch again in class if you haven't heard it yet. So we're going to walk through the elements, the prep, and then the process. All right. We're probably not going to get through the troubleshooting at the back end, but you have the slides that give you a taste of that, and either you already heard those ideas or you will. Okay. Let's talk about the elements. So go into the first slide. So parties. Those are just simply who are we talking about here. So in the case of compensation, it is typically the employer, usually one, but it may be multiple folks there. Right. Good to know in advance. And then you as the prospective employee. Items or issues, these are the resources to be allocated, right? So in the case of compensation, salary, and then benefits, right? So health insurance, paid time off, retirement savings, plans or approaches, continuing education, if they need to pay for, or if you need paid supervision that's not in the organization, continuing to get including training, reimbursements if you're traveling a lot. What am I missing? Any other issues that might be on your radar in your negotiations? Because you all have negotiation radars, right? Because I just encouraged you to. I think those are the biggies. We can toss them in as we go. Then an important, paid time off. Yes, flexibility. That's such an important one. And it kind of bridges the interview and the negotiation in the following sense. It can kind of be a structural thing, meaning like a part of the job, like a feature of the nature of the job. So partly, the interview is so important for getting a sense of that reality, like how the day and the schedule work. And so if they haven't gotten to it during the interview, you want to ask questions like, so what's a typical day like in terms of kind of time and place, where I would be, do I move around a lot? Am I in one place? Timing-wise, what's the typical schedule? So getting a sense of that and seeing what really is kind of rooted deeply versus open for flexibility. And then you pair that with some discussion if needed in the negotiation. You follow up with that. But it's hard to dive into that if you haven't asked any questions about it up front, because it may be that you're misunderstanding, there's certain place and time-bound issues that make it hard to negotiate. Yeah.
Other things are like gym memberships, transportation.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Cell phone coverage, car reimbursement, yeah. And those are getting to be, not that they're unimportant, but monetarily it can be smaller ticket items. So we do want to maintain a sense of perspective there. So we're not like giving away big thing to get little thing. Like we need to make sure we're, keeping tabs.
So do you say sometimes maybe it's best not to try to talk about some of those things until maybe your review?
Oh, no. You want to do it before, because review, what is it, why buy the cow if you can get the milk for free? Like once you're there, why are they going to give you a gym membership? And they may not give you one even before you're there, but we'll get there. So let's talk about these dual concepts of position versus interest. This helps get you into a strategic frame of mind. And I say strategic, it doesn't mean game playing, sneaky, conniving, right? Those are all words that we use when we're essentially challenging the legitimacy of negotiating, right? And obviously you can negotiate in a way that is kind of bad faith and can be conniving, but we want to keep an open heart here. The position versus interest. Position is the desire that you state publicly to the other party about wanting a certain item in a certain amount. Your interest is your underlying need or hope that will be addressed by the position. What the heck does that mean? So what we tend to do in a negotiation when we mess up, one of the many messes up that we do is that we reveal our interest. Oh, I have to have that much money to pay my, my student loan payment or to pay my rent or whatever. When that's our personal, our personal interest. It's not, the position is, I'm feeling like, the requirements for this position and the nature of its responsibilities will line up with a salary of X, right? So the first one is about the job. The second one is the personal stuff, right? And we make a mistake in blending the two, right? In our negotiations, the personal stuff, those interests, those stay with us. And we maintain a focus on what seems reasonable, feasibly ambitious is a term I'll use in a minute, relative to this position right now. Okay, and we'll get there. I know you guys are probably like, what? We'll get there in a second, okay? Or in a few minutes. Okay, so important concepts there. And then we have a couple of different points. Target point, reservation point. These are really key for negotiation as well. So the target point is where you want to wind up. And you have these points on every single item, every single issue. Where you want to wind up in terms of salary, health insurance coverage and cost, right? And plan, PPO, HMO. We won't go into that now, but that's a big deal. Retirement options and contribution levels, matching levels, this kind of thing. How long it takes to vest or be vested. Amount of pay time off, how that works, how fast it accrues, when you can use it, right? So potentially you have points, like targets, where you want to wind up at the end of all this for every single one of those things. Because if you don't have a point, you don't know where you're going. You can't negotiate. The table that I handed out, I'm a table kind of gal, table, matrix, that's how I roll. And that can be a way of listing all these items and capturing the points. So thinking about what your targets are. So after all the discussion, where you want to land, right? Then the reservation point is your bottom line. So for each party, they're in opposite directions, right? So if you're the employer, your target is the highest that you're kind of okay with going at the end of this, right? The reservation point, I'm sorry. No, the target is the low one, the reservation point is the high one, pardon me, right? So the target, ideally, you're trying to conserve resources. The reservation point is how high you're willing to float up, again, as the employer. Flip that, for the prospective employee, your target point is the high one, where you hope to land, like with that salary and those days off, et cetera. And your reservation point is your bottom line, right? The lowest you're willing to go. And by definition, the reservation point means that if an offer from the other party comes in below that, you don't accept the offer. You don't accept the job. It's your walk away time, okay? So that sounds kind of extreme, strict. You can set reservation points at 0. Like if you truly feel like there is no amount on that item that I would be willing to deny this job for. That's your business. And I'm not going to tell you how to set the reservation points in terms of or the amount to set them at, but that should be a very almost sacred, personal process with you, loved ones who know you, your mentors professionally, talk around, get information online, Google's your friend, right? It should be a very contemplative process for setting those, rather than, no, that sounds good, right? But what I will do, what I will be emphatic about in terms of this is when you are negotiating, is that whatever it's set at, if it's not 0, if an offer from the other party comes in below that, by definition, it means you're not taking that deal. You're done. Okay, and you don't say that. I'm done. I'm out of here. Forget you. Right? It's no implication about the actual, tone. But that's if you don't. It's important to have that mindset in mind with this. Otherwise, it's not a negotiation. Right? You have to have the points, and then you have to be able to enact or enforce the points for yourself by not violating them. So you check them, and you go through and set the points, and if you wouldn't be willing to reject an offer, if it fell below that bottom point, the reservation point, then change it up, do it again, okay? So then the BATNA comes in. BATNA is an acronym, Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. That helps you set those bottom lines, because it is a bit of a buffer, right? So if you're not gonna, if indeed the reservation point on whatever salary usually gets violated, and you're going to say no, what's your backup plan? So obviously, having another offer from another job, that makes it pretty sweet, and you can make the reservation point higher because you have something in your back pocket. Or, often not necessarily attractive, let's not give our moms and dads or relatives a hard time, but staying in someone's basement for a few months, eating the frozen dinners from Trader Joe's or wherever else. If that can at least get you by where you can cover your expenses and you don't have to jump at the first opportunity regardless of the quality of the deal, that can at least, it's not what you prefer, but it may sustain you such that you're willing, you're able and comfortable to set those reservation points a little higher, okay? So you do, part of the process of setting them is to try to, as you go into the job search process, to work on a BATNA. So ultimately, hopefully, it's another job offer, but something else where you feel like, okay, I can give this 3 months, 6 months, where I will set my reservation points not at 0, at higher, in an aspirational way to get me onto a professional compensation trajectory that I feel comfortable with, and that's worth my value, right? That is my value, right? Reflects my value. Okay. Information, that sounds goofy. We know what information is, but information here is absolutely critical, right? The more you have, the better. The less you have, literally, you are leaving resources on the table. Okay, so you got to get it. Okay, now let's do preparations. All right, so what do you want to do first? You want to identify the items that are important to you. Now I'm going to go to my notes. Sorry. So issue, the items, right? So this, again, the salary, the various benefits, right? So list out which ones are important to you. A lot of those will be similar for all of you, but then some of you have specific ones that are important beyond that. That's okay. It is important when it comes time to negotiate that you define those for yourself, or make sure that they are out there on the table, the figurative table, early on, and not defined by the other party. Just because the other person doesn't mention an issue doesn't mean that it doesn't belong in the discussion space, right? Because it's something that's important to you, and it's okay. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, and they may not offer it, right? But it's completely okay, again, assuming a respectful, professional tone, it's completely okay to bring it up as a point of discussion, right? Because it's something that's on your mind. So you want to get it out there, not just say that if the other person lists the items and if yours isn't on there, I guess I don't mention it. No, you mention it, okay? It is important to do that up front because there's a psychological dynamic that gets in play where if you let the other person dictate or they don't list items, they just dive in. And then like halfway through, you realize, oh, I really need to talk about X, continuing education, supervision, whatever. If you bring it up halfway through, 2/3 through, especially if the negotiation has been not like awesome, flowing, oh, yay, sure, we totally agree, but you've been kind of back and forthing it, it can feel like you're being game playing, that you're trying to like, oh, how about this? That you're trying to make it difficult so that they can suddenly give you something that you want. So much better than to put that up front so it looks, forthright and full disclosure. Here are the things that I'd like to talk about. You may need to do that yourself and facilitate into that because often with someone who hasn't done a lot of negotiation in a human services environment, they may just say, hey, so how do you like the offer? Or what do you think about X for salary? And then they're kind of done, right? So you may need to back up and say, of course, I'm really excited to get to the point of talking about that. If you don't mind, I'd love to just kind of list out a few different items from the compensation package that I'd like to go over today. Does that sound okay with you? And then you list them, right? And it really is that important to do that, to kind of get into that delicate facilitation role as the one down person rather than waiting later to bring it up. Okay? Yeah.
So you answered some of my questions.
Okay.
Because I'm like, this all sounds great and everything, but I'm wondering, when does this occur? When they call you and they say, hey, you know what?
Such a good point.
We want to
Yeah.
give you a job. Is that the person that we talked to? I mean,
Yeah.
because it's almost like they don't help you. You know?
Right. So, yeah, my experience is for a lot of students coming out of here is they are lucky enough to get a job offer and then on the spot. So what do you think? We'd like to offer you the position. It pays $35,000 a year. What do you think?
Sure.
And so as scary as it is, what I would really encourage you to do at that moment, because I can't imagine, first of all, I can't imagine $35,000 a year if you edit that. I mean, you may have feelings about that level of pay, in some cases at least, for a full-time position with a master's degree. But beyond that, you need to know about the whole package, right? If you're an employee who is committed to being high impact and long-term in that organization, you have no business just saying, sure, what the heck, and then figure it all out later. You need to know, what's being offered, how this provides holistically for your well-being, so you can do a good job. Right? You need to walk through the details, and there are a lot of details in that. So you want to signal that respectfully by saying, again, I'm really excited to talk about it. It would help me if we could set a time. I'm available as soon as possible. It's be available, like be prepared if there's a window of time you think you might get a call. I know it can be hard to know that you can try to be flexible rather than saying, yeah, I can't meet till next week though. Yeah, that doesn't work. So say, I'm delighted to talk. I'd like to set a time so we can go through the details of the compensation package. That's the term to use because it's not just salary. Are you available sometime tomorrow or the next day? I'd be happy to try to be flexible around your schedule. Okay.
So the answer is you're not taking the job until after?
Just say, yeah, right. So you say, I am really inclined to take the position. Thank you so much for the offer. I am thrilled. It would help me greatly to finalize my decision to set a time to negotiate the package and hear what you're offering.
And that should be done in person?
Ideally, if you can make that work versus the phone. And again, because it's so many numbers and there is such finery in terms of nonverbals there. Don't sweat it too badly if you can't. And I have negotiated long distance for some major things, but if you have the option, the in-person is better. Versus I wouldn't do it because you have a meeting or a schedule conflict, and so you're just going to do it by phone from school or something. I would commit to going in person.
So I know some of my jobs that I've gotten before, they give you a package and they say, here's all the stuff and it's all in here, and that's after you're hired.
Right. So we're trying to back that up.
Okay.
And again, we'll get to the process in a minute. We're still in the prep. But we want to try to gently, using our good clinical self-awareness, other awareness skills, mind you, again, art, not science kind of stuff here. We want to gently shift the language and then the underlying thinking to, what is being offered, right? And we'll talk about, but they don't, you can't negotiate some of these things. What if you can't negotiate? We'll talk about that, because of course that's the case. But that doesn't mean that if something's not negotiable, that suddenly it ceases to be important to you, right? And other things can be negotiated. So we have to have had that conversation to get there. Okay, I'm sorry, you had a question.
Oh, I was just going to ask what you said then, just is it appropriate to say, I am really interested in this, but can we set up the time?
Yeah, just say, I'm thrilled at the offer, I'm so interested. I would like to set up a time to talk through, admittedly, if we're a business job, like what the MBA students across the street and down the street are going to be dealing with, they would say a negotiating session, or they'd be offered a negotiating session. Here, given the culture, that could be a little scary, so you say a time to talk through the compensation package. And if they say, oh, well, we'll just give you a packet, then you go to step 2. Well, I'd like to negotiate and hear about what you're offering. So that's the language, what you're offering. Right? Because even if it's some parts not negotiable, it is still their offer to you. And you're going to get a range of offers from different places, right? So that's the language we're trying to shift into. And be sure that when you hire employees in the future, that you give them that language. You give them the social justice of engaging that way of thinking about this, right? Okay. I'll paying it forward or whatever. Okay. Did I get everybody? Did I get everyone's questions?
So do you only start that negotiation after you've been offered?
Yes.
So
That's
you do your interview, but then they call you back and say, okay, we want to offer this. Then you say, oh,
Yes.
can we sit down and
So that's the key. So yeah, that's such an important question. Thank you for bringing that up. So you may well, it's very common. It should not be, don't do this when you guys are the employers, right? Where you ask an employee, yes, what were you thinking about in terms of salary during the interview? Now, it's possible they will not move you forward in the process until you get a number, which means you darn well better prepare a number before you go into that interview. If you can't get wiggle out of it, right? It needs to be feasibly ambitious. No sticker shock, but that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about you undercutting and lowballing yourself and setting in a number that you're going to have a hard time rising above later. So figure something out if you have to.
35, 40 be a good.
So let me say a couple things. So if you were asked, hey, Letitia, what were you thinking?
Like if I made 30 as an undergrad, I'm gonna ask for more.
Yeah, we're not going to go, let's backtrack, backtrack off of that. We're not thinking about numbers. You want to say something like, and I do quite like this language, I would, of course, you could almost be a little funny about it, I would, of course, be thrilled to get to the point of talking about that. At this point, I feel like I need to still learn more about the organization and the needs of the job. Hopefully, they will either just follow suit and drop it, or more deeply, they'll get that you're exerting a bit of a strategic imperative on your end that you're not in a position to talk about that yet because you want the job offer first, right? That it's not relevant yet, right? But honestly, legitimately, because the negotiation process is about the job, right? You do need to know more about it, right? So you try to hold that off, and if they say no, but seriously, I can't promote your name until I know a ballpark figure, then you need to have you've done some research to know, and you only give a single number. I'm going to give you the example of my dear, dear husband, who, when he was a student, a master's student, he applied for a paid internship one summer at the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago. And at the end, this is a long time ago, so the numbers are a little low, but not too bad now. And he was asked what he wanted to get paid during the interview, and he said, well, I was thinking between 8 and 10 an hour. What did he get paid an hour? Thank you. Okay, you never give a range. Unless the bottom is actually where you want to wind up, and the top number is just some dream number, right? Because the chances are, unless you have lowballed yourself even with that range, and the person feels feels so guilty paying that low that they go higher, you're going to get the bottom. Right, so you want to, but it's tricky. We give the range psychologically because it softens, it takes the edge off, especially for females, folks in settings where it's conflictual to be assertive, right, or it can be perceived that way. So we need to practice saying a flat number in a way that feels, that helps us deal with that kind of internalized challenge, right? I was thinking along the lines of, and even along the lines, frankly, can be dangerous, that terminology, because that can make it sound like we're smudgy about the whole thing, like, oh, we could take less, right? I was thinking that X would be appropriate.
So I guess kind of like a follow-up question, what about when it's like either the job does not have a salary posted or it's like a range, like 40 to like 60,000?
Yeah, so then if you're asked in the interview, you want to try to still, try to punt that question or the answer. If you truly feel like the range, that you could work within that range, you could say, I imagine, it sounds like the range, something within the range would be workable for me. So you can say that. Because they're probably worried about that. Like, are you going to fit with what we've allocated here? That said, though, in some cases, I still would suggest for folks that they come in above the range. And that's tricky, because wait, it's above what we said. What are you talking about? But we'll get to why right now, which is that you have to have opening offers, right? So the culture of negotiating, at least in our current context here in Madison, Wisconsin, the United States, is that it is a bit of a haggle, right? It's back and forth, where each party initially, we'll get to the process next up, but you're going to start with your opening offers, and then you kind of go back and forth in a volley, and you kind of adjust. So you're going to go down a little bit and down a little bit. The employer's going to go up a little bit and up a little bit, right? And if you start with your target point, so where you want to wind up, you are violating that norm. The expectation that there'll be some give and take for a little while, right? And it is actually, it can be quite angering, very frustrating to say the least. Like, no, that's the lowest I'll go. What? But we just started. What do you mean? And they won't necessarily say that to you. So in fact, you have to have what I call buffered target when you start off. And I'm not going to tell you exactly how much. It's like some percentage over, a couple grand over for the salary. And so that maybe if you feel like that range is pretty modest and the top is really where you want to end up, that actually you would need to start over the range to get that top of the range. If it's been a published range, then to not come off as a bit of a dork who's not paying attention to things like job postings, then again, we'll talk about the process in a second. You want them to start, but if you have to start or you're responding, you could say, wow, I appreciate that there is a posted range, having heard about the nature of the position, where you're going with it, its responsibilities. Admittedly, I was thinking more along the lines of, let's say 42, if the top is 40. So you are acknowledging and contextualizing in terms of the information out there, what you're saying, right? Okay, so let's try to charge ahead though so we can get to that actual process. So you want to set those offers, the buffers for all the different points even. Paid time off, continuing education, all that kind of stuff. And then as ever, consider the context, just because you're going to be really nervous and overwhelmed and all of this. So just try to learn what you can about who's going to be there, where it's going to be, how long you have. Like, are they planning an hour? Are they planning half an hour? It'd be kind of awkward if you thought it was an hour-long meeting and they thought it was half an hour. And suddenly things have to get rushed, in a 5-minute period at the end there. Just ask. So, how long from when to when? Like, how long do you have to meet? I'm be happy to be free for an hour. Kind of encourage that. And if you end shorter than that, that's great. But, good to have that time. So, okay. So now the process, the way that the visual I give here, the metaphor. And so, guys, in class in a few weeks, you'll get the exact same visual. Sorry. Is if you've been to like a children's museum, typically this is where they have these, and they have air currents, and then kids can balance balls on top of the air currents, and it's kind of this fun challenge to get it just right so it's balanced. Well, imagine we have a table, it's the bargaining table, and that represents the final negotiated agreement. And from that table, you have all these little air currents, and then we've got a set of ping pong balls. And the ping pong balls are all the different items that we're negotiating, okay? So how we're going to get started with the process, we come after the small talk coming in. Hey, oh my gosh, thank you so much for the offer. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for taking time today to negotiate with me. After all that, you're sitting down and you're generating that issue list. So let's talk about, what we want to talk about today, right? And so each mention of item is like putting it at the top of the air current. You're just getting it floating up there. All those balls are each issue, right? Important, when you initiate that list, you're not talking about amounts yet. No dollar amounts, no day amounts, no whatever. You're just simply giving the keyword. It's like it's setting an agenda, right? Because it could be, especially if the other party, the employer, doesn't do that and you have to facilitate into the list, they may cut you off, like kind of not getting that you just want to like list out things and say, oh yeah, on that item, what were you thinking for that? Like, oh, salary, yeah, they'll just start adding the amounts, and then you need to very, very nicely facilitate. Oh gosh, I'm delighted to get into the details. If you don't mind, I just wanted to list off the things that I hope to talk with you about today, right? So then go through and you're putting them up on there, right? Okay. Yes?
So I'm still confused over who is in this meeting. Are there multiple people in the meeting? Because
There can be, but usually it's one-on-one.
And who is it? Because I have a hard time believing that my supervisor who's hiring me is going to be the one that can determine.
So in nonprofits, I would say fairly, not infrequently, it might be your supervisor.
Yeah.
In a public
I didn't
sector
mean
environment,
that.
it might be the HR person.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, or a bigger nonprofit.
So,
But it varies. It varies greatly.
So I just can't get this picture painted
Okay.
because I'm thinking that somebody calls you and offers you the job, and it's probably going to be your supervisor or HR or somebody offering you the job, and then you say, can I set up I appreciate blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah.
Can I set up a time to come in and talk to you about compensation? And then
Yeah.
they're like, we don't handle the compensation or the hiring.
Well, typically, I don't have the actual data on this, but I would think that certainly with the salary, you have someone who's kind of your content invested person, so your supervisor, a manager there, someone you're working with day to day in terms of services, who's going to be involved in some of the basics. Now, they may try to need to refer you to HR if they have HR for some of the other details. So then you have to kind of extend the concept of negotiation to include that conversation as well. And again, smaller nonprofits or not giant nonprofits, they lack the HR resources to have that kind of person meeting with you. So it would
Right.
be the supervisor typically, or
I
a
was
manager.
Just kind of thinking like a county or a state job, something like that.
Right, and that's different too, because you, in some cases, Wisconsin, not so much have contracts, negotiated, agreements. Yeah, but you're there's still typically there's someone that you're meeting with to finalize acceptance of the offer, or you can, even if it's not structured that way on the phone or via email. Okay. So you get the items up, and then there's the making of the offer. Ideally, you want the other person to start, in general, regardless of who you are. The employer wants you to start, you want the employer to start, right? And why is that?
To get the baseline of like how far to go up
You don't want to start too low.
I don't want to start to, yeah, so the employee, admittedly, as much as I talk about good information, if I had, without getting specific, in the past, if I had started first, it would have been unfortunate for me. Like I clearly did not have good information about what I was likely to get. So ideally, you try, and it can be a cat and mouse game, and you want to avoid getting too much into that. So the employer may come, start off saying, so what were you thinking in terms of salary? And so you have one shot at saying, and if it's someone who's negotiated, they actually, I think, will be lightly amused or give you some credit for trying. You could say, actually it'd be helpful for me to hear what you had in mind or what you were offering, right? And but if they respond, no, seriously, okay, then we're done, right? Okay, everyone wake up. Now you need to present. So give it a try and see how that goes. And then here's the thing, in terms of counter offering. If you are countering, so if it did work out for the other person to go first, you need to respond in a fairly timely way. Don't cut them off, but don't sit there contemplatively for a few minutes. For two reasons. The longer you sit, it signals either that you're okay with the offer, and you may well not be, and or that you lack confidence in negotiating. And that kind of gives the person a little more confidence to push, right? So you want to try to, having made some notes about possibilities of what the other party would say and what you're going to say back, you want to try to step in there assertively, professionally. And when you do that, you do want to signal the magnitude of the gap, right? So if it's shockingly big, or there's some work to be done, I think it's fairly important to actually suggest that and say, wow, thank you so much for getting the ball rolling. Admittedly, I had more in mind, X, right? If it's a gap, but it's not too far off, you could say, well, thanks for getting things started. I was actually thinking, X, right? So you hear, again, use your clinical skills. You can hear the difference in that. You're being gentle, respectful, professional in both cases, but in one, kind of the wow, admittedly, like that language is signaling gap, work to be done, versus, okay, well, thanks for getting things started. I had in mind a little higher than that. I was thinking of this. So your language is just kind of signaling, contextualizing your offer a bit, and the work to be done. Now, conversely though, if they are countering, whether it's that you had to start first, or they've gone, you've gone back, then they have to respond to you. Because initially it's going to be some volleying, where it's kind of money being given up or given at that point. For you, it's kind of you're giving stuff away, so you better start it with the buffered target too, right? Because you probably have 2 each side rounds of counter offering, right? So if the other party is countering, it's their turn to respond to you. It's the opposite. You just need to sit tight and not say anything, because what comes out of your mouth while you're waiting for that counteroffer is some bad stuff, and you can hear the money going down the drain with every syllable. Okay, because what does it tend to be? Oh no, but I'm flexible. I can negotiate that. That was just starting. So it isn't that you're sitting there in a haughty kind of way. I dare you to challenge me, but rather you just want to be okay with listening and kind of patiently awaiting their response. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
So so let's say for example, they tell you a number and then you go back, do you have to justify it and say, well, thank you, I was admittedly thinking blank because I have experience in this and I have that, or should you just leave a number and just let it and see what they say?
Such a good point. So at times you may be asked for a justification. My recommendation is you never give it if you're not asked, even if you're asked, which is why it's so key to wait till you have an offer, because what the offer does is it tells you, you almost have them then a little over the barrel negotiating wise, because they've said, you're it. Your combination of your own personal, who you are, your experience, your qualifications are what we want. So at that point, it's actually nominally about you, and it's about the job and the current, this point in time nature of that job in this larger market, right? The problem, there are many different problems with getting into personal stuff. So one is, you have the reality that you have prospective colleagues at that organization, some of whom may have 2 PhDs, 20 years of being in the field. They left a previous executive director position to be a case manager here. You just never know. Or they could be really bad negotiators, right? And there's inequity in the organization as a result. And so you getting into personal justifications without knowing these people's stories could actually be offensive, or you walk right into, oh, that's why you think you need this? So-and-so has 2 PhDs. She's been here for 10 years, and she makes half of what you're asking, whatever it is, right? So it can, that adds some fuel to a potential fire or starts a fire, right? So ideally then, at the point of having the offer, the personal stuff is no longer relevant, and it's really about what seems appropriate given the job responsibilities. But I would hold off. I would say it is a social worky thing and a gender thing that we want to justify. We feel horrible about having to ask for something and assert needs, but really it's best, we can in fact do ourselves harm when we think we're softening our imposition. It can come off the opposite way. It can come off actually as offensive in some way. So better to keep it clean and just patient, and you can, if you want to say things, you can say, thank you so much for the back and forth. This is really helpful, and I really appreciate your give and take on this. I'm so excited for the offer. That's the kind of additional language you can pepper in if you feel like it. But I would say, first off, resist the impulse altogether and just try to kind of sit tight on it. But if you feel like it's getting kind of cold or you're worried, that would be the language I would go with, is thank you so much, and I'm really excited, and that kind of thing.
And then so I know you don't justify and say, like, I have this, whatever. What about the job? Like, not saying that the job is demanding, but, like, it's asking for this, and,
Yeah, and again, I would honestly keep that relatively short and sweet, but, based upon, maybe you could refer to certain major initiatives that they want the job to take on, or, but most basically, given something as general as, given the nature of this position and the direction it's going in, it seems to me that a salary of X is appropriate in the larger market. Yeah. So try that. But again, if they push for further, then pull out again other aspects of the position. I would try to steer away from the personal thing, because again, you just don't know what you're walking into there. So, and also if it's about debt stuff, what you need. I've had a student in the past who went to a job fair, speaking of job fairs, for a position out. It was coming in from like the West. It was in Chicago. It was a child welfare position from a Western state. Came in, he lowballed or something, and she said, I'm sorry, I can't pay my bills with that. And he said, I've got a pen out. Let's figure out a budget for you where you can make that salary work. Which, that's outrageous and, not going to happen, right? Although it did. But that's also how it's not going to happen, but that's the path that you wind up walking down, going there. Doesn't, because again, people, get by on, a lot less than we often have, right? So again, don't want to go there either, right? So it's about the job. Okay, so you have the initial offer, and that then makes the ball come down a little bit closer toward the final, bargaining table, right? And then the counteroffers and the counteroffers. Each step of that, it's getting closer to the table, right? But at some point, freebies are over. So you do, and I can't, again, it's art, not science. Maybe 2 each, back and forth. And then this is where it gets really like learning to ride a bike. Whoa! You, in fact, want to table certain single items. You really don't want to single item negotiate. Then you bring, especially the big ticket items like salary, bringing that ball down by itself onto the table. Because here's the deal. You might do that up front. The ball gets brought down from the current. It's not super glued, but it's like industrial strength Velcro. And I will be saying these exact same words in a few weeks, so I apologize. I'm a little wedded to the image. And so it's on there with Velcro, and then a few minutes later you find out that there's no health insurance, and you have to pay out of pocket. Or there's absolutely no retirement savings offered here, unlike the other job that you're in the process of learning about, which has a pension, maybe like $1,000 less on salary, but it's got a right? And you haven't heard about that yet. You will have to go back and rip that ball off to get some what's called concession making going. So you can do it, but that's a pretty deafening roar of a rip sound on that Velcro coming off there, which is very violating of trust. It will be very disruptive to the flow of the process. So you ideally want to avoid that. So how do you do that? So this is the learning to ride a bike. So you go back and forth, and chances are, in most cases with human services negotiations these days, the employer is going to want to settle it. And what you're going to need to say, again, very professionally, respectfully, is, thank you so much for this back and forth. It's been very helpful. And then you need, also with wording that needs to signal the amount of work to be done, how close you are. Either, I feel like we're still a ways off in terms of agreeing on the salary, but before settling that, it would be really helpful to me if we could talk about health insurance and paid time off. Or if it's close. I think we're close. I feel so good about this. It's a little off, but it would be helpful to me to table this for a moment. And right, so do signal, especially then. It's almost more important than early on with the response to the offer from the employer first, because you're tabling and you need to send a clear signal about how much work is left. Because if you don't, they may think, oh, you're real close, and then you loop back around to it, and suddenly you're trying to move it $5,000, and they'll get fussy with you because they maybe thought, oh, we're like $1,000 off or something. Maybe that's my feeling about it. So signal that, table it, so then the ball's tabled in the air, and then you do the same process again with another item. So initial offer, that kind of thing. And you get 2, maybe even 3. So then table that. If you don't mind, we could table that too. I know we have salary and health insurance, that we're in process with. If I could now hear about what you're offering in terms of paid time off. Again, the language, what you're offering, right? I want to dive in now to things not being negotiable. Can you negotiate? So do you ask if things are negotiable? Because what are they going to say? Because they don't like negotiating either. So even if it is, in theory, they're going to say no. Believe it or not, they'll lie. I don't blame them. But here's the catch. Here's the concept too. And it's, again, in the context of being respectful and professional, even if something's not negotiable. So yeah, chances are health insurance, right? How the retirement savings plan works. You may have choices, but it's then fixed within that. How your investing period is fixed. That does not mean that if you wanted something different, that want somehow never existed. What it means is then you talk about it. You ask them what they're offering. It's still an offer. Even if it's fixed for them, it is their offer to you. And you can express, oh, goodness, I actually had more in mind X in response to their thing that they may be up against a wall. They can't do anything about it. But then they can make concessions to you on items they can do something about. So, for example, if you are facing a higher than expected premium for your health insurance, right, or a lower matching rate on your retirement savings, and they're like, it's out of my hands. That's just our policy. I totally understand that. Admittedly, that is lower than what I was aiming for. And then you do concessions. I would be willing to consider that offer if you could go up in salary from X to Y. And that's the concessions piece. So that helps you get around non-negotiable, items, or what they say is non-negotiable, and don't even quibble. It is or it isn't. It kind of doesn't matter, because again, you have an interest, and that's okay. You're allowed to have interests, even if they can't meet them. And either for things that are both negotiable, or where one thing is supposedly not negotiable and one thing is, you pair to the concessions. And part of your prep for the negotiation is to jot down a list of possible concession pairings. Because I don't know about you, but there's no way I could come up with that on the fly, right? So, and there are things that objectively have similar values, right? So, a couple days of paid time off versus such an amount of salary, or that kind of thing, right? Don't give away too much to get something small just because you want it. The other thing to keep in mind is the concept of Pareto optimality in economics. This is the true, honest-to-goodness, social justice relevant beauty of negotiating, in that someone's not going to give away something that has less value than what they're getting. And each of you is going to hold different values, monetary and emotional and otherwise, to different things. And through the process of not just the general back and forth initially, but the concession making, you're both able to optimize the outcome here. The organization meets its kind of resource obligations and limits, and you realize the combination of salary and time off and whatever else that you feel you need. And then it makes for just this better employment relationship and support from the start. I mean, it's great, really, in theory, and it can be in practice, right? How are we doing? We're at like 4 more minutes. Yeah. So that's the nutshell. That's kind of how you do it. The concessions are really important, right? And that is how you push beyond the first offers, that free back and forth, you're kind of giving stuff up without getting anything, to settling things down, right? And then you bring them down in pairs in many cases. Sometimes later on, smaller items, you can bring it down single. But salary should never be. I would say salary, health insurance, paid time off, dangerous to bring down individually. I would do pairings, because they're the biggest, proportionally the biggest things, right? And you do, I would say, after tabling 2 or 3 things, then you need to make an agreement on one of those before moving on, because there's a stressor of not having finished anything. If you defer that too far along, then it can feel like you're being too picky, too demanding, don't know how to land this, it's going to take forever, whatever. So you do want to figure out a strategy for landing something, and then picking back up the other items and working with those. Yeah.
So you said with the pairing, so let's say my ballpark or whatever, the X number is 42, but they're only, on the application, they said the range was from like 35 to 40 or something, 25.
Yeah.
And so then if they're not willing to do 42 and just salary, but then I can ask for that in health insurance, that remainder 2,000 or something.
So typically it winds up, again, health insurance can be difficult to negotiate. Like premiums are fixed. It's like single versus family or whatever else. So it's more that you would try to budge on the salary figure, like getting up more in salary to compensate for a lower than expected cover offer for the health insurance premium, let's say. And again, with health insurance, for example, like single items really are many different things, right? There's the premium, there's the deductible, there's the copay or the coinsurance. So you want to be sure going into it that you break out those different items. Now with ACA, with the health insurance reform, it's safer. But previously, for example, I've had students, negotiating where, so imagine settling the salary, and it's okay, not really what you wanted, and then you find out that your monthly premium is $1,000. That's like a salary item. I mean, that's beyond just that you have to, do concessions. That completely changes the meaning of your salary, right? And that can happen with, I know for younger folks and first-time jobs out of school, the retirement thing, you kind of discount the value, but oh goodness, please don't, right? You need to have something attributed to your retirement savings beyond Social Security, and you need to research the area, prevailing averages, and then negotiate for that. And if they don't give it, if they don't even have retirement things set up, some small agencies don't, then negotiate it back in salary, right? And then you personally, this is not a negotiation issue, discipline yourself to put that into a 401k or an IRA kind of plan, right? Okay.